That mechanism should now be used so that this dispute can be resolved as quickly as possible.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I can say that we are also very disappointed to see that at the first serious challenge to this Act, we're in the very same place we were a year ago, with an impasse between the auditor and an entity where public monies are being spent. I mean, at this point in time, the auditor has said, and in his report it says, that currently oversight of the board's operation by governments is negligible. I mean, that's a serious situation for all Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, my concern today as well is with the transparency of the government. We have the IEF, which controlled and wouldn't release information a year ago. It's controlled by a secret slush fund. We have the Change Secretariat, where all of the messages from government are being controlled. The government tried to cover up an extensive report on the socioeconomic impacts of gambling, and as well, Mr. Speaker, the freedom of information requests that we've had and others are held up routinely by government. My question to the Minister is, why is this Auditor General Act not providing Nova Scotians with more openness, transparency and accountability as the Auditor General intended?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying in my earlier answer to the question from the Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, the Auditor General Act that was supported unanimously in this House could not be more clear. It says, quote, where the Auditor General and the auditable entity are unable to agree as to what records are privileged records, either party may make an application to the Supreme Court to determine the matter. End of quote. Mr. Speaker, our message to the two parties involved in this dispute are get on with it and get this matter resolved.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it seems the Minister of Finance's answer to the issues the Auditor General is having with the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board is go fight it out in court. I don't think that's acceptable to most Nova Scotians, and so, Mr. Speaker, he won't even admit that there are improvements necessary in his own legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, according to the Auditor General, and I'll quote from the report that was tabled earlier today, quote, we abandoned our attempt to conduct the audit after the board acting on instructions or operations from ExxonMobil Canada Limited and Encana Corporation denied us access to information needed to conduct the audit. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Energy, does he stand by the Auditor General or ExxonMobil and Encana?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As that falls under the jurisdiction of the Minister responsible for the Auditor General's Act, I'll refer it to him.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying in my earlier answer to the question from the Leader for the Progressive Conservative Party, the Offshore Petroleum Board has circulated a letter today, which I have seen, in which they take strong issue, very strong issue, using very strong language, Mr. Speaker, disputing the Auditor General's version of what transpired. And in fact, the matter quoted just now by the member opposite, the member for Dartmouth East, is one of the statements with which the Offshore Petroleum Board takes particular issue. So it is just possible, Mr. Speaker, that there is another side to this matter. That is exactly why this House created a dispute resolution mechanism, and it is now the duty of those parties, both of which were created in the public interest, to follow that mechanism and get this dispute resolved.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm surprised the Minister of Energy passed that off to the Minister of Finance, since the question was not about the Auditor General. The question was about the board which that minister, the Minister of Energy, is responsible for. And it's a shame that minister doesn't recognize that he's responsible for the board. And Mr. Speaker, the question was whether he stands by the two oil companies who the Auditor General has pointed out, or whether he stands by the Auditor General. As simple as that. And he didn't want to answer. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to follow up with Minister of Energy, and I hope that he'll answer it. The auditor also said, quote, offshore activities are being, he cannot ensure that offshore activities are being conducted safely and with due regard for the environment and ensuring the public interest is protected. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Energy tell us what plans he has to immediately ensure that the public interest is protected and that the activities in the offshore are being conducted safely and with due regard for the environment?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, this very clearly falls under the purview of the minister responsible for the Auditor General's Act, so I'm going to ask that minister reply.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite, of course, has clearly mischaracterized the nature of the dispute, Mr. Speaker. This is a dispute between the Offshore Petroleum Board and the Office of the Provincial Auditor General about the authority of the Office of the Auditor General. That's why the dispute resolution mechanism was created, and that is a mechanism that those parties should follow.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I think the only thing being mischaracterized here is what my question is. My question is, there are issues raised that are not part of the dispute about whether they were audited. The question, the Auditor General said, and I have read the response from the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board, and they do not take issue with the fact that the auditor said that he can't actually determine whether issues are being done safely. And I asked the minister what he plans to do to ensure that there is safety in the offshore. Well, apparently he has no plans. Well, Mr. Speaker, the last question I'll answer, and either one of them can answer because neither one can seem to decide who's responsible for it, is it was said, quote, there is currently oversight by the board's operations. Currently, oversight of the board's operations by government is negligible. Given the board's environmental and public safety responsibilities, we question whether this is in the public interest. Mr. Speaker, the board again has not disputed that finding in their letter. So, Mr. Speaker, the question is, what actions is the minister going to commit to today that will ensure that there is government oversight of that board in the future and that the public interest is protected?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too have read the letter, and the Offshore Petroleum Board clearly does take issue with that particular statement by the Provincial Auditor General. Mr. Speaker, the best, clearest, simplest, most straightforward way for these parties to resolve the dispute is to follow the dispute resolution mechanism approved by this House last year, Mr. Speaker, and our message from this government to those two bodies, those two entities, is get on with it.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health and Wellness on April the 6th, 2011, indicated her department was working with the Diabetes Care Program, who at that time had completed a scan of the type and level of financial assistance available for insulin pumps across the country. The minister also stated she would be looking at a program rollout in New Brunswick after they announced they would be funding insulin pumps. Given that the minister has been studying this issue for at least the last 8 months, and it's been an issue before the minister's office within the department for at least 3 years, my question is, why have we yet to see this government take action around funding for insulin pumps?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the member for the question. Diabetes, as you know, is an illness that many Nova Scotians have. There are two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Very small number of provinces in Canada provide coverage for insulin pumps for children with type 1 diabetes. New Brunswick has adopted a program, and I believe they're in the process of evaluating the impact of that program. And Mr. Speaker, what I said last year still applies. We will await the results of the evaluation to look at what we can learn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, better management of diabetes, whether it be through funding of insulin pumps or through funding for diabetic-related medications, is an investment It's not a cost. It's an investment in patient care. It reduces visits to physicians. It reduces future costs associated with heart attack, stroke, blindness, kidney failure, and depression, all of which are risk factors associated with poor diabetes management. My question to the Minister, when will the management of diabetes become a priority for her government?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there are a variety of ways in which we can better manage chronic disease. And I thank the honourable member for the question because it gives me an opportunity to talk about our Better Health Care Sooner plan, which is the plan that we have to invest in primary health care and chronic disease management across the province. Mr. Speaker, we are working very hard in our district health authorities around the province. We have numerous new collaborative healthcare teams that are doing an amazing job in the area of chronic disease management, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to invest in the primary health care area to better manage chronic diseases, including diabetes, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess we need to remind Nova Scotians that in 2010, this government attempted to limit blood testing strips to 2 strips per week in order to save money. Unfortunately, they were forced to reverse this short-sighted decision. This is a province where type 1 diabetics earning the lowest incomes pay some of the highest out-of-pocket costs to manage their diabetes in the country. Mr. Speaker, these are facts this government cannot ignore. When can Nova Scotians expect an announcement around some form of funding for insulin pumps?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I think I need to correct the erroneous statement by the member with respect to attempts to limit blood testing strips. Mr. Speaker, people who have diabetes do need to test on a regular basis. However, Mr. Speaker, it's also true, and there's very good evidence that the drug companies have promoted testing for people who do not need to be tested. And Mr. Speaker, the important thing is that we need to be using our healthcare dollars where the evidence is to support outcomes that will make a difference, not using our healthcare dollars for things that aren't going to improve people's health. And Mr. Speaker, that's precisely why we're waiting to see the evaluation from New Brunswick to establish whether or not insulin pumps in fact result in better management of diabetes for the individuals who have the pumps and for the healthcare system, and not simply relying on the manufacturer's information, people who have a vested interest in having these insulin pumps adopted, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. The tragic death of young mother and teacher Teresa McAvoy in October of 2004 focused attention on protecting the public and helping steer kids away from serious trouble. Justice Merlin Nunn's report was a thought-provoking wake-up call, and the previous government publicly accepted all 34 recommendations. 2.5 years later, this government has been caught by the Auditor General turning its back on key recommendations designed to protect the public and turn kids around before it's too late. Will this government commit to implementing all of the Nuns Commission's recommendations and to getting the job done now to prevent further tragedies from happening?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for that question. Absolutely, this government, the Department of Justice itself, has spent a considerable amount of time reviewing that report, examining, and I'm very proud to say before this House that a majority of those matters have been taken and completed. But all things can't be done immediately. It takes a step process. We're committed to working through that And as this report pointed out, is that the majority of what was required in that commitment has been met.
The honourable member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the Nunn Commission, the NDP leader and now Premier said in a 2007 opinion piece in the Weekly News that it is important for judges to have good options in front of them. He was aiming those thoughtful comments at options post-sentencing, but the same principles apply for issues of pretrial detention or release. With a case processing target of 98 days, youth in serious trouble typically go months on some form of release. But the inability to have strong supervision leaves a huge gap. Good options, if I may use the now Premier's words, are needed. The gap identified by a monumental public report in this province must be addressed. Does the Minister agree with the Premier that judges need good options to deal with youth who are in serious trouble?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for that question. I've had the pleasure to meet with my colleagues from across the country, also with the federal minister responsible, and there's a number of changes that are happening within the federal government that's going to make it easier for us to fulfill that very mandate. And we're committed to that, and we'll continue with that. So we'll see how that process rolls out. I don't know if he's familiar with the work that's being done, but if he isn't, he could take some time, stop into my office, and we'll certainly see that he's briefed.
The honourable member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, after 2.5 years, the Minister has failed to complete the important task of implementing all 34 recommendations. Now, the Auditor General outlined today the serious gap that exists between the options youth court judges have between detaining a youth before trial and releasing them with limited supervision. A gap that exists in this province and through which many youth fall because the government backed off on implementing a bail supervision program. That gap endangers the public and causes youth who are poor and have fewer supervision options to be detained more often than others. Will the Minister commit to going back to Cabinet and advocating that the government protect the public and work with troubled youth by reinstituting the Youth Bail Supervision Program?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for that question. Once again, I'd like to point out that this government is committed to the safety of all Nova Scotians and to the dealing with our young offenders. And that's why one of the projects that we have committed to was investing more into crime prevention. I think that's an important area that's there. Also on the issue of incarceration or methods of dealing with that, we're consulting with a number of stakeholders in regards to that issue. We are also consulting with our federal and other provincial partners as to best practices that are going there and how to look at a unified approach to that issue.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, early in September, the Canadian Pediatric Society issued a position statement recommending a second dose of chickenpox vaccine. At that time, the department responded to the statement by stating all publicly funded vaccination programs were being reviewed for the next fiscal year, and I'll table that article. Given recent day revelations about internal department reviews being conducted with the goal of reducing winter road maintenance budgets, for example, my question to the Minister of Health and Wellness: could the Minister confirm whether her department's internal review is being conducted with an eye to reducing vaccination budgets?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we conduct reviews of this nature around vaccination after there are new studies come out, we rely very heavily on the health aspects, the impact on people's health, especially on children and vulnerable people, and that will be the information that will be given priority and attention as we do the evaluation, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, coincidentally, in early September, the Conservative government in New Brunswick proposed the elimination of free flu vaccines for those individuals with chronic diseases between the ages of 18 and 64. What became clear in subsequent days was external organizations such as the Medical Society of New Brunswick, the Canadian Diabetes Association were not in favour of these changes. Governor of New Brunswick also committed herself to seeking public input into this particular change, amongst others. My question to the minister, who has or will this minister be consulting with externally when it comes to the review and potential changes to publicly funded vaccinations?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as you know, unlike New Brunswick, our government decided that we would provide flu vaccine for free for anybody in Nova Scotia, and we encourage people in Nova Scotia to get the flu vaccine. With respect to the chickenpox vaccine and the 2-dose recommendation, we are in the process of doing an evaluation with respect to that. And we know that there are a number of other provinces that are now looking at implementing the 2-dose requirements. And we will have a decision in due course, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It does sound like very little consultation in my view. Mr. Speaker, if it wasn't for the Canadian Pediatric Society's position statement that promoted media to ask questions, Nova Scotians would not have known about the review of publicly funded vaccination programs offered by the department. My question to the minister, what other programs are being reviewed within the minister's department?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, we are in the process of doing the work that's required for next year's budget planning. But, Mr. Speaker, the Public Health Division of the Department of Health, overseen by Dr. Bob Strang, who I know that all members of this House consider to be a very capable leader in that position, are in constant conversation with their counterparts across the country. They take into account the latest scientific information which has been brought to the attention of public health officials through the Canadian Pediatric Society. And as I said, we are in the stages of evaluating and planning for the upcoming immunization season as part of our budget cycle, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, when many homeowners turn to provincial home repair programs, they quickly discover that they cannot access the programs because their household income is too high. In some cases, a household income of just over $28,000 means they make too much to qualify. To put this in perspective, Mr. Speaker, if two parents from Kentville each work full-time minimum wage jobs, they earn too much to qualify. Mr. Speaker, too many Nova Scotians are being left out of these programs. Will the minister commit to increasing the income limits so more Nova Scotians get access to emergency repair programs?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Community Services certainly understands the significance of that particular program and how it does help individuals throughout Nova Scotia. But there's more to that program. If the individuals sit down and talk to our caseworkers, there's often the opportunity there. It depends on how we're looking at their income. So that's what I always encourage individuals to do, is that not just look at the application, but to make an appointment that they can have the opportunity to sit and discuss with the caseworker, because often when we look at those income levels, there's a variety of other items in there that can be taken into account in terms of what their eligibility is. So what it is to encourage people to have that discussion. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, under this government, families have been slammed by more user fees, increased power rates, a 25-cent hike in gas, and a 2% hike in the HST. The essentials are eating up more of the family budget. There just simply isn't any money left at the end of the month to save for home maintenance and repairs. Mr. Speaker, if this government isn't going to stand up to Nova Scotia Power to decrease rates, if this government isn't going to remove the tax on gas, and if it isn't going to repeal the HST increase, can this minister at least ensure that programs designed to help are accessible to all who actually need it?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for the question, because it gives me the opportunity to say that this government has done more than those other two parties ever dreamt of doing over their terms in government. And in the case of putting in, we've invested over $100 million within 2.5 years to help individuals in a wide range of programs, from housing programs, investments in that area, public housing, accessibility, poverty reduction tax credit, affordable living tax credit. I can go, I know it gets them upset because they're hearing all that we're doing. And we've helped a lot of Nova Scotians. And Mr. Speaker, we will continue to help. It's I find it very amazing that they can often stand there and, as we often said, you know, it's during a very difficult time in this economy that we're dealing with. There's many things that we don't have control over, but we do have control over helping individuals, and we have. And I've heard the other members saying it's federal money. Over $100 million was not federal money. It was our money that we helped. See, they don't like it. They don't like it when you have a good answer.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, when the child tax benefit was introduced... Mr. Speaker, when the child tax benefit was introduced in 1998, under a Liberal government, I might add, it was meant to support children and lift children out of poverty.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Your microphone's off when I say order.
Sit down.
Thank you. I would mind the honourable members, when somebody has the floor, to please have some respect and decorum in the chamber on all sides of the house. Okay? So now I will recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, when the child tax benefit was introduced in 1998 under a Liberal government, it was meant to support children and lift children out of poverty. Will this minister commit to letting the child tax benefit do what it was designed to do, to help children, instead of counting it as family income, thus keeping people out of emergency housing repair programs?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I have one answer to that. The child tax benefit, the Liberals clawed it back. We increased it by 22% per month, I may add. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. 2 years ago, in fact, I asked the Minister of Health and Wellness to provide some indication as to the future plans for the Dartmouth General Hospital. She indicated she'd get right back to us, and, well, here we are 2 years later. Today, the residents of Dartmouth and surrounding areas are still waiting for that response promised 2 years ago. The hospital functions at 92% occupancy all the time, which is really good if you're a hotel, but not so good if you're a hospital. On Tuesday, there were 3 patients in the ER waiting for a hospital bed. Today, that number's grown to 4, and as the minister is aware, Mr. Speaker, from previous question periods, I can go through pretty much every day of the week and give you the people who are waiting because it's overcrowded. Unfortunately, it's business as normal. So my question is, would the minister please, finally, after 2 years, tell residents when the Dartmouth General Hospital will become a priority?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Dartmouth General Hospital is a very important healthcare facility here in the Capital District Health Authority, and I think as many members know, and certainly the honourable member who raised the question and members who represent constituencies on the Dartmouth side of the harbour, when that hospital was constructed as a very important community hospital, there was in fact an entire floor of that facility left undeveloped. The demands on that hospital continue to grow, Mr. Speaker, as the population in the outlying areas around the Dartmouth General continue to see expanded growth in population. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, we are very aware of the pressures on that facility. I toured that facility. I've met with the staff there in the facility, and I know that they do phenomenal work, often under great pressure. And Mr. Speaker, we will be looking forward to the work that we can do with the Dartmouth General and the Capital District Health Authority to meet that community's needs in the future, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the minister's answer. It's basically the same thing she said 2 years ago when she promised to get back to us and let us know what the plan would be. And it's the same answer again 2 years later, and I think it's about time we had an answer. You know, it's my understanding, the minister's right, there's a vacant 5th floor which could be used for a whole bunch of things, from handling patients waiting for hospital beds in the emergency room, or used if OR capacity is increased, and as it happens, there's an empty OR there as well at the moment, which requires a very small investment of infrastructure and HR, which would relieve strain on the entire system. And yet, unfortunately, the hospital can't get an answer from the department, and this is going on 2 years now. Mr. Speaker, the solutions are there, and the only thing that's willing is the will for the minister to say to the community, this is what our plan is for the hospital. And in fact, those plans from the hospital to our department have been there for 2 years waiting for a response. So, Mr. Speaker, could the minister please give residents of Dartmouth and all the communities that hospital serves an idea as to when they can expect an answer from her on what the future of that hospital will look like?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, as members will know, we made a substantial investment in the Rapid Assessment Unit at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital to increase the capacity of that particular emergency department to flow people through quickly. And thousands, literally thousands of patients have been able to avoid going through the emergency department there and get quicker access. We've recently announced the expansion of the ER hours at the Cobequid Multi-Service Centre, and in fact adding greater capacity for the medical surgical equipment. Mr. Speaker, in times of great financial challenge, we are in a very steady, straightforward way, step by step, improving the services that Nova Scotians can expect in their facilities, healthcare facilities around the region, including here in the Capital District Health Authority, Mr. Speaker. And I look forward to having an opportunity to see the Dartmouth General Hospital reach its potential and meet the community needs in the not too distant future, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the residents of Dartmouth will be happy to know that her focus is on other hospitals and not theirs from her answers. They'll be happy to know that when they're sitting in the emergency in Dartmouth, that things in other hospitals are great, even though she doesn't
Order,
hear.
please. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has elapsed. I will now recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a point of order. Today in question period, the Premier provided table information in the House and misrepresented what that information meant. He said that tourism went up from 2008 to 2009, Mr. Speaker, which is true. However, he told the House that there was not a ferry in the tourism season 2009. Mr. Speaker, I have the article right here, which shows that the ferry was not cut by this government until December 2009, after the tourism season. But I will thank the Premier, Mr. Speaker, for showing that when there was a ferry in the Yarmouth Harbour, tourism went up, not down.
Yes. Order. Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, had I been allowed to complete the filing of the documents that I had, Mr. Speaker, I will also file this one that shows that road traffic from New England into Nova Scotia went up during that same period, which means the ferry traffic went down, leading to this very unfortunate graph, which I will also table, showing the continued plummeting of ridership on the ferry, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Not a point of order. A difference between two members on stats. I thank the honourable members. The honourable member for the honourable host leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will you call private member public bills for second reading?
Private members bills for second reading.
Thank you very much. Will you call bill number 69?
Bill number 69, Transparency in Power Rates. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleased today to be able to rise for a few minutes and talk about a bill that's very important to Nova Scotians and certainly to all of us putting this forward, Mr. Speaker. Transparency in Power Rates Act number 69. Mr. Speaker, we have to... I'll hear myself think here. Mr. Speaker, it's important that Nova Scotians understand, with all that's going on today, all that's being said with regards to energy, the increased cost. We hear talk about green energy, Mr. Speaker, which we support. I know it's been said otherwise, Mr. Speaker, but we started those initiatives some years ago, and I guess that's what brings us to this piece today, Mr. Speaker. This has been tampered with, I guess is the right word, from what we started years ago. The government today want to speed this policy up, Mr. Speaker. Nobody knows the cost of this policy, although there's been numbers quoted as to what it might be, anywhere between 5 and 16 million. I don't know how they come up with those numbers, as nothing has clearly been put forward, Mr. Speaker, by the government of what the cost of this high cost of the electricity plan, Mr. Speaker, that they want to put forward in debate. This bill would compel Nova Scotia Power as well, Mr. Speaker, to indicate, and we think this is very important for transparency in itself, it would compel Nova Scotia Power to indicate what portion of any rate increase is caused by government policies. Now, that's something I'm sure that they would not want to have put forward on the bill. They probably couldn't get it put on the bill, Mr. Speaker. And the reason they couldn't is because they don't know the cost. We keep hearing about all of these wonderful initiatives. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the reality of power rates and the increase in power rates is hurting families in this province. I want to give you an example of a lady I know. She's lives by herself in a home that she owns. Mr. Speaker, earlier this year she came to me with a very high power bill that's been able to climb. She's a minimum wage worker, works 40 hours a week. You can do the math and figure out that's not a whole lot of money. There's a lot of people like that, Mr. Speaker, in this province. They need to know what they're paying. They can't keep paying more and more and more. But this lady comes to me with a bill that's already out of hand. We have a pretty good relationship with Nova Scotia Power when it comes to trying to assist constituents with managing, Mr. Speaker, and trying to work out some kind of plan so that they're not cut off. But this bill was somewhere in the vicinity of a couple of $1,000s, as you can well imagine, given that she heats with electricity as well. And through the winter months, when it's cold, and it was last winter, as it is most winters in this fine province, the bills get out of hand. They get too high. And on minimum wage, you have to make decisions. Are you going to eat? Or are you going to pay the power bill? So we tried to work something out for her, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, in this particular case, we were unable to do that, and her power was cut off. It's a tough day when your power is cut off, I think, Mr. Speaker, for anyone, especially someone who's working every day, trying to get along, trying to earn a living, trying to do the right thing. A very tough thing to go through for this lady, Mr. Speaker. And then there's further complications with that. It's not just as simple as having your power cut off because you can't pay the bill. Now, here's a lady who has a basement that has a sump pump in it. When it rains, and as we know, it rains here too, and it's rained a lot in the last year. Weather patterns are so unclear these days. And all of a sudden she has the worry of, now my home is going to flood. No power, no pump, and we're flooding. It just keeps getting worse. The stressors keep building, Mr. Speaker. And what are we going to do about that? Well, we haven't been doing anything except talking about raising power rates, Mr. Speaker. It's the wrong way to go. All we've seen so far in the NDP's planned increases, here we go, 2% more that they've put on, Mr. Speaker, in the bite-the-bullet plan that we keep referring to. The fact is that the government of Nova Scotia, and Nova Scotia Power, I should say, don't know again. They don't know what the clear cost of this project is going to be. They've got grandiose ideas. Let's hurry up and speed up the green energy plan. They've got all their eggs in one basket here with this big plan in Newfoundland, Mr. Speaker. Where's the signed agreement? That's not even in place yet. May not even happen. $20 billion. We're hearing for 20%. Where's that money coming from, Mr. Speaker? Well, I can tell you where it's coming from because we were told. It's coming from the ratepayer and the taxpayer. And we had a bit of a disagreement, I guess, or an agreement to disagree in a committee meeting back some time ago, a few weeks ago, that the taxpayer and the ratepayer are not the same person. They are very much the same person, Mr. Speaker. We need to realize that. So we're going to invest somehow $20 billion it's going to cost between who knows what, Nova Scotia Power, we're going to assume. Where's that money coming from, though? That is coming out of the pockets of Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. That's where that's coming from. Ratepayers and taxpayers. If in fact it ever happens. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've wanted, our party worked with all the parties and in a consensus with Nova Scotians to create a reasonable, balanced green energy plan that would help diversify our renewable energy portfolio and reduce our emission targets that accompany economic goals. We need to get back to a balanced green energy approach, not one that is too quick when we don't know the cost. It's no good to get green too quick if you can't afford to get there. We need to have a better plan. We don't have any plan right now. This government is keen on patting itself on the back for having the most aggressive renewable targets in North America, no matter what the cost is to Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, it's tough economic times all around, all over the world, and certainly here in the province of Nova Scotia. All we're doing is putting more stress on families that are already struggling. And these families aren't just people, Mr. Speaker, you might think that are on the lower end of income. They are not. These are everyday working families. 2 people working, got a mortgage and a car, etc., and so on. Families to feed, what are they doing? Where's the money coming from? They're struggling right now to put food on the table, and you want to increase power bills, and you can't even tell them by how much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's not acceptable. At the UARB hearing, under direct questioning, Nova Scotia Power provided numbers that ranged, as I said earlier, from $5 million to more than $16 million. Unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. We cannot afford. And here we are again. We cannot afford these increases. Here we are again, and we're looking at, they've just announced this week another 3+% for the coming year. Where is that money coming from, Mr. Speaker? We only have so much money in our pockets. We keep seeing taxes go up. We see power rates go up. We see gas, unfortunately, still going up with the tax on tax that's not been removed. Mr. Speaker, the paychecks aren't going up. There's less money in the pockets. Where are they going to get the money to pay the power bills? And I know all the members in this House, or a good lot of the members in this House, I'm sure, deal with their constituents on a similar basis. People are struggling all over. And as I said, it's not just low-incomers that are having these problems, Mr. Speaker. In all fairness, this is income levels, all income levels, unless you're maybe well over $100,000. And I can't speak to the exact amount, but I do know that there are people, everyday working people, who have got pretty good jobs who are struggling to get by and put food on the table, Mr. Speaker. Now, in August, we put together a Let's Talk Rates survey, and we went out and we asked people. This just isn't me standing here or our party standing here. We went out to Nova Scotians and we got their input and their thoughts. 850+ people took part in that. We've got several phone calls, several emails besides. They want fairness, Mr. Speaker, and they want transparency, and that's what they deserve, Mr. Speaker. Fairness and transparency. There is a way. And I can tell you, if our law was ever to be passed, Mr. Speaker, it would require the cost of government policies to be shown on the power bills. We think that's a start. We think that that's fair. People should know what they're paying today, all around, inclusive. They should know what they're being asked to pay tomorrow and into the future as we move on to what are green energy, more renewables, etc., which this party believes in. We initiated that. We started that. We believe in the green energy system, Mr. Speaker. That's nothing that we've ever said any different, but at a pace that we can afford. It has to be something sustainable. If we can't sustain that pace, Mr. Speaker, we don't have anything else. We don't have to worry about the environment if we have no economy, Mr. Speaker. We can't afford to lose any more jobs, Mr. Speaker. High power rates are going to cause job losses. The small business sector won't be able to afford to keep staff on, Mr. Speaker. They're going to have to let staff go. It's going to be that decision time again. Am I going to lose money, or am I going to let a staff member go? Unfortunately, it's going to be the staff member that goes. More lost jobs. This province cannot afford, Mr. Speaker, to lose one more job, let alone 5, 10, or 100, or 1,000 more jobs, Mr. Speaker. We cannot afford to lose any more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that I only have so much time today. With those few words, I thank you for the opportunity today, and I'll take my seat.
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise here today to be able to speak on Bill 69, an act to amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act, respecting transparency in power rates. And certainly, we've had quite a bit of discussion over the last number of days in our House around power rates, so it's good to have an opportunity again. Certainly, passage of this bill would mean that any rate increase provided to Nova Scotia Power be brought right here before this legislature to be decided by a vote here of the House. And the opposition is suggesting that this would bring more transparency to the rate-setting process. Well, Mr. Speaker, the process, I think, right now couldn't be more transparent than what we have. Decisions are made based on evidence presented by an independent body, the UARB, and the arguments made by stakeholders through a very public hearing process that considers all the evidence. And if they don't have enough evidence, they'll ask an expert or a specialist in the field to go out and get more information for them. And I understand there's been no really significant stakeholder complaints about the process since it was established back in 1992 when the Conservative government of the day privatized Nova Scotia Power under the, I believe it was under Donald Cameron's premiership at that time. Mr. Speaker, the process we have in place now is rigorous. It's designed entirely around the overriding focus of keeping costs to the consumer, to the ratepayer down, and certainly believe that the system is working. Because the electricity prices aren't rising in this province because we're not voting here in the House on the issue. If that were the reason, certainly I'm sure long before now, this government or previous governments would have brought a bill forward to have a vote in the House. But obviously that hasn't happened, so it's not the solution here to reducing electricity rates. But electricity rates are primarily rising because of the high cost of fossil fuels, and the biggest part of that is coal, our reliance on imported coal at this point in time. The Conservatives long ago decided to rely on fossil fuels, and then we've had rate increases of something like 40% over the last 10 years. Price of coal has jumped 75% in the last 6 years or so. And so, Mr. Speaker, in response to the bill that's before us here today, I think it's quite simple. Why would we waste our time fixing something that's not broken? That takes our time and our energy away from fixing the real problem and on the electricity rate burden, and that's the increasing cost of fuel. So we have an established process, Mr. Speaker, and it's enshrined in legislation which requires Nova Scotia Power to justify any rate increases on any capital cost projects that they might have on an amount of over $250,000 or over $250,000, and that has to come before the Utilities and Review Board for consideration. So it's an open process, it's transparent, and I believe it works. This process requires full public hearings. I know members opposite, they have had the opportunity to intervene at those public hearings. And there's a consumer advocate, there's a small business advocate, government, various stakeholders have the opportunity to come forward and present their point of view and say whether they think the rate is justified or not. So it is a full public process, and I commend anybody that has appeared before the UARB in the past. There's also a mechanism there, Mr. Speaker, for requesting more information. You know, you can put a written request in and ask Nova Scotia Power through the UARB. It's a transparency process. I don't believe members opposite have done that through a written request. I stand to be corrected, but I believe that's true. I know they presented and asked for information, but not on the written request. But if you haven't, I certainly would encourage you to do so. And that information is certainly there for the asking. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia Power is a cost of service regulated utility and that operates under the Public Utilities Act and the regulations. And it's regulated by the Utilities and Review Board as defined by the Utilities and Review Board Act and the regulations. And it's actually obligated by law, and that law was passed right here in this House of Assembly to serve all Nova Scotian loads at the lowest possible cost, while meeting its system reliability and meeting its environmental regulations. So the UARB ensures that will happen. As I just stated, Mr. Speaker, the process works. The 2012 settlement agreement reached during the public hearing process of the Utilities and Review Board, it removed the ratepayer portion of the executive bonuses, something that's been a concern to a number of Nova Scotians. And so that's gone, that's eliminated by the UARB. It reduces the allowable rate of return. That was taken down this year, again, through the process, through the open and transparent process that is working. So that rate is lower. And it also, this year, they cut the, by $27 million, Nova Scotia Power's increased revenue applications. So again, I believe the process is working. So this was all done by agreement without ever coming to this House. It was done through a public process, hearing rate application that the public had a chance to participate in, and it wasn't necessary to come here. So why would we want to replace, Mr. Speaker, a well-established, well-proven, transparent process? That leaves decisions here in this House, would leave decisions here with politicians. You know, I think we have an open, fair, and transparent system right now, and surely the opposition is not suggesting that we put it in the hands of politicians where there would be political influence. That's not what we need. I know none of us here in this House are experts in these complicated financial matters, and neither are we any whizzes in electrical generation. I don't believe any of us here are electrical engineers, and so I think we need to leave it with the expertise that's there available to the UARB. The province already has a rigorous public process in place that requires Nova Scotia Power to prove in detail that any proposed rate changes are required. So the real debate in this House and across the province is about rising electricity rates. And escalating electricity costs certainly are a burden to all of us, whether it's a small business or a large industrial or a homeowner, those on a fixed income. It's certainly a challenge to each and every one of us. But the real fact is that coal prices have increased by 75% over the last 6 years, and that's really what's driving our electricity costs. And I believe that previous governments had the opportunity to do something about that, to alleviate the problem, but now we're paying the piper. The problem has come home to roost, and it would have been good if previous governments had done something about it, but this government does have a plan, and we're working to change that. So we'll not be deflected from the real issue here by the legislation that's been brought forward, that really I think is just a waste of our time. They're trying to fix something that's not broken. The decision-making powers of the Utilities and Review Board is exactly where we should be putting our time. Now, very recently, Mr. Speaker, the province of New Brunswick decided to undertake a review of their electricity model, and they looked around at other jurisdictions, and they said Nova Scotia has a model that works. They have a strategy that's in place that's acceptable, and they liked what they saw here in Nova Scotia. So obviously, it's not just this government, but it's other jurisdictions that feel that we're on the right track. So the real issue that needs to be fixed in Nova Scotia is our reliance on coal. And that is what's going to make a difference with our electricity rates into the future. And Mr. Speaker, we are the only party that I think that has a plan to fix that. Passing meaningless amendments to legislation in the House is not going to decrease our reliance on coal, and it's not going to bring down the price of electricity. Increasing the generation of renewable energy and having a balanced and diverse energy mix is the best way to achieve affordable, stable electricity rates over time. Now, the Conservatives have brought this particular bill in here today, Bill 69, but I don't think it's going to solve the problem. In fact, I know the government, when the previous government, when they were there, they had a chance to do something about electricity rates. And what did they do? They raised the HST on home energy, and I know the Liberal Party also supported that. But the NDP has removed that tax, that HST, from high energy prices, and that's saving ratepayers about 8% on their power bills. And I would hope that any future government, when they're there, would not bring that back. But I'm a bit worried that that certainly could happen. So I encourage the members opposite and those watching here this afternoon to take another look at our plan.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
The minister doesn't need to worry. You'll get another 10 minutes shortly. Let me first start by correcting the fact. I don't know exactly where the minister gets his information, because last week he stood up and suggested that we had not appeared before the Utility Review Board as interveners, and we not only had, but had also asked questions in the hearing. And then this week he suggested that we had not submitted written information requests, which of course we did. We were, in fact, the Liberal caucus submitted more actual questions on the written question portion than almost any of the other interveners, with the exception of the board hired consultant. So I'm just not sure where it begs one to question the credibility of any of the information that the minister says when he can't get those very basic facts correct. The Bill 69 that the Progressive Conservative Caucus has introduced is an intriguing bill to me. It's intriguing because just a few weeks ago, here they introduce a bill that would suggest having a public committee review the costs. I think this is the one that reviews the cost of. Oh no, sorry. This is the one that requires that any rate increase that is granted as the result of a provincial policy or action would result in. Would require it to be spelled out in terms of the costs. That makes sense. That actually makes a lot of sense. However, the Progressive Conservatives couldn't be bothered to do that when they were in government with the legislation that they introduced. And so I'm not, and many of the members who were part of that caucus are still sitting in these front benches now talking about how great this act is when they couldn't be bothered to do it just 2 years ago. That's a little over 2 years ago, I guess. That is, Madam Speaker, that's troubling. But I mean, that doesn't take away from it. It doesn't take away from the need. The other thing is that they have stood up a number of times and complained that it's the NDP's changes to EGSPA and the expansion of those environmental goals that are resulting in the increases right now. And I don't dispute the fact they're going to result in increases later on. But in fact, the increases, and Nova Scotia Power said this at the board, the increases they're dealing with now are from the issues that the Tories put in the Act in 2007. And listen, we all supported that Act, but it was the Tory government that brought in the Act and the changes. The changes that are being dealt with and costed now before the board have not been, have not.
Stand up, Leonard. Stand up, Leonard. Why don't you stand? I'll stand up. Yeah, where you are. I'll stand up. Can I get up here?
I'll just stand and wait because I get another 10 minutes later. So. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so it's interesting that, you know, it's important if we're going to have a discussion about this to have the correct facts. The Tories brought in EGSPA in 2007, which, listen, as I understand it, I wasn't here at the time, but I believe all parties supported that bill at the time. The issues on the renewable energy side that are being dealt with before the board now are costs that were in that act in the early years, which have not actually been changed. Much as I'd like to blame the NDP for that, they're actually the costs that the Tory government had put in for those early years. And that they, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but that the member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island is correct that they proposed. Can't believe I just said that out loud.
Andrew, disappoint me.
I know. And so I think and so that the problem with that is that, you know, this bill, the idea in this bill makes a lot of sense, but some of the statements that have been made by the third party around this are simply pure rhetoric because we're dealing with the costs that they introduced. And we're dealing with a bill or the origin of a bill, EGSPA, which that actual government at the time, Minister Prant, didn't actually outline the costs at the time. I'm glad that they've had this change of heart and think that we should do this now, and I actually think that makes a lot of sense to do it. But I'm sorry about that. The fact is that any legislation, whether it's on energy or it's in health or education, it would make sense to do that for any provincial legislation or changes in regulation to outline what the costs are going to be to future taxpayers or ratepayers or, you know, whatever the case may be. That's just good government policy. That's responsible government policy to say, hey, we're introducing these new regulations or this act, and we believe that Nova Scotians deserve to know what the costs of that, or what we project the costs of that will be, understanding that that could change. You know, I'm disappointed that the minister would stand up and it seemed anytime anybody introduces a resolution or a bill around the idea of energy rates or on changes to energy issues, it's, well, that's not going to work. The sky is going to fall if you do that. And it belittles the idea that some of these ideas may actually have merit and some of them may reduce rates. This bill obviously wouldn't reduce rates, and I don't think that the Progressive Conservatives have suggested this bill would reduce rates. I think this is really about transparency, which is a good idea. But I think that there have been things that would, and so for the minister to stand up and say, well, this bill won't reduce rates, well, I don't think they ever said it would reduce rates, this particular bill. However, there have been things introduced in this House that are working in other provinces. And the Minister of Finance stood up in this House on Thursday and he talked about the insurance, his auto insurance bill, and he said, well, we're copying this section from Alberta and this section from New Brunswick, and I think there was a section from Manitoba as well, and they're saying because it works well in that province, or this works well in that province. Well, last session, I introduced a bill that would allow renewable energy suppliers to sell directly to consumers and actually introduce competition on the renewable front. It is something that had been refused by the previous Progressive Conservative government, and the minister stood up and suggested that the energy market in Nova Scotia would fall apart if we did that. It's been the law in New Brunswick for years, and in fact, the building right across the street that the Department of Energy is in buys their energy through New Brunswick now as a result of them allowing renewable to retail sales, and the New Brunswick energy market has not fallen apart and in fact has grown and prospered, and they have access to capital, which then addresses some of the cost pressure issues on renewable energy. I think there's no doubt, I don't think you'd find too many people that would disagree that the price of coal and other fossil fuels are going to increase over time. They will. I mean, we know that. You can look at it, but that doesn't. But coal is going to be part of our mix for a long time. In the committee hearing that we were, the member for Cape Breton West and the member for Hants East West, thank you. and I were at recently, Amir even said, I think it was 35% when they look out, for the foreseeable future is going to represent coal. So, you know, we're still going to have to address that issue. So the minister should not be saying that there is no role for the legislature in talking about power issues, because his party certainly didn't say that in opposition. They certainly didn't stand up and defend the Utility and Review Board when they were in opposition. They stood here and they demanded that government after government after government of any stripe deal with those power rate issues. And so for now, the minister to turn around and just dismiss any idea by either of the opposition parties as just a waste of time and the URB is working perfectly. Well, we know it isn't. It's not working for Nova Scotians, and I think if you go and ask Nova Scotians about that, they will tell you that it is not working for them. So just in closing on this particular bill, because I'll be back a little bit later to talk about 92, you know, 69, Bill 69, which deals with requiring the government to actually, I guess, put a price tag in simplest terms to any policy or regulation, does make a lot of sense. And it's something that we should not be only applying to energy regulations, but any bill. And it should be something that governments simply do as a matter of course to let taxpayers know what the cost of, or savings, if there's savings, of any particular legislation will be. It's the responsible thing to do, and I think from that perspective it does make sense. I only wish the Tories would have done it when they were in government, because we'd probably be a lot further ahead by now. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Good job.
I now recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would think the government would welcome this legislation. The cost of energy is the most important issue facing our province today, whether your household depends on it or whether your job depends on it. If the government, or if any government, cares about ensuring that we're getting the best value for our electricity dollar, they would welcome the ability to better understand the costs that determine the price we all pay for power rates. It would actually take the heat, Madam Speaker, pardon the pun, off the government. Nova Scotians would have a clear understanding of why they're paying what they're paying. People would understand government's impact on power rates, and if there was no issue with that, then there would be no issue. And nothing for this government to feel defensive about. So why not support this piece of legislation? If the government is responsible for causing power rates to increase, the people of our province will have a chance to hear that power rate increase debated right here in this legislature. Transparency. Mr. Speaker, the NDP never had a problem with transparency. Now in government, they hide the impact of their energy policy decisions. Now, they often talk about rhetoric, but I am hearing it once again here tonight, Madam Speaker, on the topic of energy. So let's shine a light on the cost inputs that generate electricity in this province. Coal, for instance, $50 per megawatt hour. That's the cost to generate a megawatt hour of coal of electricity through coal. Wind, as we know, sometimes replaces coal on the grid when wind is blowing. And this, of course, is because the province has legislation requiring that we move towards renewables. And of course, that was put in place by the previous Progressive Conservative government. Now, the thing with wind is when it replaces coal to generate electricity on the grid, it does so at a cost of $150 per megawatt hour. So there's simple math, going from $50 per megawatt hour to $150 per megawatt hour. So if you, or if any Nova Scotian out there went to a gas station and had the option of purchasing a $50 tank of gas or a $150 tank of gas, which one would Nova Scotians choose? I don't think there'd be much debate. So those are pure facts, Madam Speaker, and I'm hoping that the government members are accepting those facts because they're facts. And if my numbers are wrong, then please table some numbers that dispute them. We support green energy, but we accept that improvements need to be made in green energy technology. Renewable energy must also make economic sense. Yes, as the Minister of Energy has told us tonight, the price of fossil fuels have risen, but they also have a natural market price corrective mechanism. Does anybody remember a couple of years ago when we were talking about $200 oil? Everybody was saying the price of oil is going to $200. What happened? dropped down to about $60 a barrel. Now it's fluctuated, now it's up around close to 100 again, but yes, because the price of the commodity increases, the economy slows down, they have to drop the price of oil. Same is true for any other fossil fuel. That point should be recognized. The impact on Nova Scotia households, Madam Speaker, is obvious because people pay their power bill and they see the price going up. But how is this affecting jobs? The world does not want to buy products and services produced in an economy that is expensive. That's pure and simple. Our own people here in Nova Scotia often choose products and services at a cheaper price. Now, that may not always be a good thing, Madam Speaker, but you know what? That is the reality. My grandparents used to have a small general store in Little Judic that was quite successful. They used to extend credit to people. They don't exist anymore since a long time. Now people are buying probably those same goods. They're probably made in China, and they're probably buying them through Walmart. That's reality. Now, the minister has said, and in this case, jobs in this province are still dependent. Look at paper making. Do we want people to be making paper in the province? If we do, unless we want to export those jobs to China, then we have to accept that energy costs contribute to whether or not we can keep those jobs in this province. So the minister said that this bill is about politics, but I don't believe that it is. I'm trying to speak sincerely this evening about what I believe with respect to what's causing the power rates to increase. Now, the minister said that it's caused by the price of coal. Well, yes, the price of coal has risen. And he's also said that we should have done something years ago. Well, coal right now is a third, 3 times less expensive than wind energy right now today. And we know, as he said, that it increased 75% in recent time. Well, we also know that coal used to be a lot cheaper. So years ago, when this government says that we should have switched sooner than we have now, they're missing the point that coal was even cheaper back then. So, you know, should we have exported those paper-making jobs years ago to places like China? I'm glad that we didn't, Madam Speaker. So this legislation that we're talking about tonight would help to bring clarity to what government can do to save jobs like those in the energy-intensive industries like paper-making in this province. Thank you. Yes, the demand for paper has declined, but we're all still using it. The world still needs paper, and there's no reason why paper mills in Nova Scotia can't be the last man standing in this industry. I look at New Page in my own area. There's 4,000 jobs attached to that operation, in and out of the mill. I spoke to a young teacher in the area, and she told me that 50% of the children in the school have parents who are employed in that industry. That industry will die if we do not do something about power rates. Plain and simple. We see that not only does it affect people who are working right now, but people who are retired. If that mill shuts down, we are very likely looking at pension reductions in the neighborhood of 30%. That's very significant. And I don't think the government is going to step in to top those pension plans up. For mills to survive, they need, and this government needs to realize that power rates have to be competitive. At the very least, this government needs to recognize that if our power rates are not competitive, especially in industries like paper making, that puts downward pressure on wages. We hear of another mill in the province right now that's trying to find ways to stay alive, and what are they doing? They're asking for job cuts and wage concessions. So this bill would compel Nova Scotia Power to indicate what portion, if any, rate increase is caused by government policies. Years ago, our party worked with all parties and in consensus to Nova Scotians to create a balanced and reasonable green energy plan that would help diversify our renewable energy portfolio and reduce our emissions targets that accompanied economic goals. We need to get back to a balanced green energy approach, Madam Speaker. This government is keen on patting itself on the back for having the most aggressive renewable targets in North America, no matter what the cost to Nova Scotia families, and I've just outlined what those costs are. We believe that both the government and the power company must be clear about how much they are asking Nova Scotians to pay. That's a fair ask, and it's an ask I think most Nova Scotians are making. And since August, almost 850 Nova Scotians took part in a Let's Talk Rates survey, and they emailed us their thoughts. They told us they want fairness and they want transparency, And that is what this legislation, Madam Speaker, is calling for. Why not give the people what they want? Why not give the people of Nova Scotia more affordable lifestyles and more affordable energy rates? If our new law is passed, it would require the cost of government policy to be shown on power bills. Nova Scotia Power's latest announcement of another 3.2% increase on top of an already expected 5% increase is a route to lost jobs and hardship for Nova Scotians. We cannot afford to lose any more jobs. So, Madam Speaker, we hope that this government will do something that it doesn't normally do, and that is listen to an opposition bill that makes sense, that offers Nova Scotians transparency about power rates, and we hope they will support the bill so that we can shift our focus to a better balance between what Nova Scotians can afford and our ambitions for a greener economy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable, the House Leader for the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can you call Bill number 92?
Bill number 92, the Power Rates Reduction Review Act. The Honourable, the Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate you recognizing me. I'm very pleased to rise to launch debate on the Power Rate Reduction Review Act, Bill number 92. Mr. Speaker, without a doubt, power prices in Nova Scotia, electricity prices, have become one of the leading issues, if not the leading issue, facing both Nova Scotia families and single parents and seniors and others who are on fixed incomes who are struggling to get by, who have seen the cost of too many everyday items increase over the past few years. But it's also important that we get electricity price policy right in this province, because too many businesses, small and large, are now facing awful decisions about who to keep on, who to let go as they grapple with higher and higher electricity prices. There have been the headline grabbers like NewPage, like Bowater and others, that have pointed the finger specifically at the rising price of electricity in our province. But, Mr. Speaker, we also know, thanks to a survey by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, that this year 20% of Nova Scotia's small businesses anticipate they will be laying off an employee or two somewhere during the year. Mr. Speaker, the reason that it's so important that we review where we are on power price policy in this province is for them, for those businesses, small and large, and the people that they employ, and for those families struggling to pay their power bill, for that senior in their own home who wants to stay in their own home but is struggling to balance the household budget when the price of things like power is going up, for that young working mother who makes enough to get by today but knows that as power goes up and up, that it gets harder and harder to get by. Mr. Speaker, I understand, as many people do in the world today, that we all share one goal, and that is to get to a future date where we have a greener economy, where we have sustainable, environmentally friendly sources of electricity. Every province in Canada, every state in the United States, every jurisdiction in the world is dealing with that very issue. And I want to be clear that the Progressive Conservative Party fully supports that initiative. In fact, when the PC Party was in government, it launched it with the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, which has become a model for other provinces and states across our continent. Mr. Speaker, it is an act that set real targets with the force of law for greenhouse gas reductions, for renewable energy source targets, for mercury content, and for any number of other important environmental indicators. The great wisdom of that bill, which all parties in this House support and which others across the continent are copying, is that it recognized that very important principle, that you have to integrate those environmental targets into a growing economy. that creates real sustainable jobs, that no one should have to lose their job or go into debt in their household because someone else has set an environmental goal that is out of reach or unaffordable. That's why that bill remains the standard in North America for integrating environmental goals with economic goals. And I do want to point out that that's just as there were specific goals for the environment, there were specific goals for our economy, including that we would grow the economy of Nova Scotia at the rate of the national average or better each year, and that all of the environmental goals were set consistent with that goal. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, in the 2.5 years since the NDP came in, many extreme changes have been made to those environmental targets without regard to their effect on the economy or jobs or household incomes. And bottom line, Mr. Speaker, is that Nova Scotians, their families, their grandparents, their mothers and fathers are being asked to pay the price of someone else's desire to boast that they are greener than the other guy. And that is not right, Mr. Speaker. That one group says they want to be the most extreme at something and passes the bill on to everyday Nova Scotians, who are the ones that have to pay the price. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, what we have here today in Nova Scotia is a horrible combination of a naive government and a for-profit monopoly that is incented to build up its infrastructure as big as they can possibly make it, to dream up big mega projects supported by the policies of this government, and to build them as big as they possibly can, because their profit is set as a percentage of the capital that they're able to accumulate and employ. And so that company and the executives of that company, who know that their bonuses are based on how big they can make that percentage, had before them in 2009 a naive government who had the common interest of putting in place extreme laws and regulations that would require the company to build up its capital as big as they could. And it's Nova Scotian consumers that have to pay the price for that unhappy combination of a extremely naive, extremely ideological government and an executive team at a company that by law is encouraged to go along for the ride financially. Well, Mr. Speaker, this is exactly the problem that this bill is aimed at solving. That by creating a power rate reduction review committee made up of the very people that the government tells them to bite the bullet and pay the price to review all of the decisions of government, policy, cabinet directive, regulation, OIC, whatever action the government takes that is driving up their bills, they will get that list. And every single one of them will come to this House of Assembly where it can be reviewed and costed and debated and decided on in the full light of day. Because that fundamental principle must be respected, that those that are asked or told by their own government to pay the bills deserve to have this ability to review those bills for themselves. Mr. Speaker, I ask every MLA in this House today to consider this bill and to move forward to get it passed and adopted, because there is a sense of urgency today. One of the reasons for that sense of urgency is that we do have 1,000 jobs at risk in the Strait area at New Page, both at the plant itself and in the forestry industry that surrounds the plant. And 2,000 jobs at risk in Queens County, both at the plant itself, at the Bowater plant, and in the forestry industry that surrounds it. 3,000 Nova Scotians are already counting on the government to do what it can, not to make matters worse by driving up their electricity prices, but to go one by one through the policies of government that are actually the root of the problem and reversing them to make things better, to save those jobs, to save that plant. But the second reason there's a sense of urgency, hopefully a more positive reason, Mr. Speaker, is that we do have this great shipbuilding opportunity coming our way. That the Irving Shipyard, on the basis of merit, is going to bring to Nova Scotia, coincidentally or not, 3,000 jobs building ships for the next 30 years. And it's important that the government not blow that opportunity, not screw it up as they are on the path to do by driving the price of electricity ever higher. Because, Mr. Speaker, as much as they have admitted under questioning that their policies are going to add as much as 2% to our electricity bills today, it is also true that the most extreme of their targets have yet to kick in, and that Nova Scotians, small and large, businesses small and large, are faced with future compound percentage increases year after year after year if the government stubbornly stays on the same path. That's why we need this committee of those that are paying the bills, not just to save the jobs that are at risk today, but to make sure that the government does not screw up this great opportunity that Nova Scotians have, that they don't blow it, or we'll be looking at ourselves several years from now and wondering how on earth, when all the tough things are going on, and we have one good thing going for us, never mind debating how we got it, and we messed it up by stubbornly sticking to an extreme agenda that is disrespectful of the people that pay the bills, that is disrespectful of the people that create jobs in our province, that is disrespectful of the need to recognize that the economy and the environment have to work in concert, that is disrespectful of the original principles of that Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, that we want to create jobs and grow the economy of our province at the national average or better, and we want to get to that cleaner, greener economy that every single one of us knows we have to get to at the right pace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand here this evening to speak to Bill 92, Power Rate Reduction Review Act. I'm pleased to speak to it because I recognize that for Nova Scotians, whether they're individual Nova Scotians, whether they're people who are looking after their families, whether they're business, do have a burden to bear, and that is the cost of electricity and heating. And I think it's not only, of course, electricity costs that have been increasing. If we look at the last year, the cost of oil has increased by something like 20%. The cost of natural gas, Mr. Speaker, has increased by 14%. Because of those factors, perhaps transportation costs, the cost of firewood has increased. So it is a burden for Nova Scotians, and that's exactly why we've done several things to try to mitigate those costs. We've removed the HST, provincial part of HST, from home heating costs. We've created the Home Heating Assistance Rebate Program that allows low-income Nova Scotians, Madam Speaker, to claim rebates of up to $200 per year. And we're using Efficiency Nova Scotia to make sure that Nova Scotians throughout our province are able to find ways to conserve energy and reduce their costs through making their homes more and their businesses more efficient. And I think, Madam Speaker, that it's somewhat ironic that the Progressive Conservative Party, the party that sold the power utility in 1992, is now the party that thinks we should be using another layer of administration and bureaucracy in government to manage power rates. I think the third party has, and its approach in Bill 92 is, in a sense, showing its failure to recognize the emerging issues that relate to the costs of energy. And certainly, chief among those costs are the rising costs of fossil fuels. And that's related, Madam Speaker, those rising costs to declining supplies, to the more difficult extraction costs for fossil fuels, and to increase demands throughout the world. And those costs will continue to rise. They've had an effect, as the Progressive Conservative Party should recognize through the time it was in government. They have been rising for a long time. In 2009, electricity costs increased by 9.4%, in 2007 by 4.8%, in 2006 by 8.6%, in 2005 by 6.1%, just to use some examples. And the price of coal as the Minister of Energy noted earlier, the price of coal has increased by about 75% in the past 5 years. Of course, it's not only a rising financial cost that we need to be concerned about. We also need to be concerned, Madam Speaker, about the costs of using fossil fuels in our environment. I'm a social worker by training, and I was noticing in an article I was reading very recently that a psychiatrist mentioned in, I think, something like 1978, that the pressures on the world environment through growing population and shrinking resources and harms that we've been doing to our environment were actually increasing environment. So we've known in every different field for a very long time about the costs of continuing to burden our environment through the use of fossil fuels. And I think this the previous 10 years, when the third party was in government, created an opportunity to do something about those problems, and in fact, it was a lost opportunity. Bill 92, Madam Speaker, seems to hope that another layer of decision-making will somehow remove all these imperatives of cost. And it seems to be looking for another kind of quick fix to the problem of electricity and heating costs. But on this side, we have a vision. We've developed a renewable electricity plan that points us in the direction of creating 40% of our electricity through renewable resources by 2020. I think that's a remarkably important direction, and we've enshrined that in legislation. We've built on that plan not simply by talking among ourselves, but by seeking public consultation and expert input. The opposition has been talking about biting the bullet. Well, we've done that, and we've done that in a way that we think will include reasonable costs. Our vision includes increasing the ways that we generate electricity through wind. We've been I think finding a number of ways to do that. We're building now Nova Scotia turbines in Trenton, which will help fuel our own market as well as markets in other parts of the world, and creating jobs in the future. And also currently, in the county that I live in Kings County, we've recently approved regulations that will allow large-scale wind farms to be located on the North Mountain, a place where wind energy is quite viable. And on a windy day in Nova Scotia, even today, we can count on 20% of our energy being created through wind power. We've been focused on finding a solution to the problem of harnessing fundy tidal power. For 100 years, for more than 100 years now, we've been thinking about this. Acadia University has papers on file which show that research was being done on that project since 1910. And we're committed to see, and working with partners, 4 corporations at this point are ready to working on being ready to put turbines in the Bay of Fundy. We're committed to see, Madam Speaker, whether it's possible to generate clean electricity, safe electricity in the Bay of Fundy. We've been thinking about how to use biomass more effectively. We've heard about that, of course, a lot in relation to pulp industry, but there are other ways to think about that too. I was in Digby just recently, talking with folks there who we've made an investment in a study that will look at a power plant that will use biomass from local private woodlots that may create the biomass through silviculture, and people there are extremely excited about the possibilities of fueling maybe hospitals, businesses, and other institutions using that kind of approach. And while we've paid less attention to this, one of the things that's also possible as we move forward is solar power. I was talking with a plumber friend of mine recently who owns a business in the Annapolis Valley. And Ron Martin Plumbing and Heating has, for the last 2 or 3 years, had a solar technician on staff because they know that there are opportunities to keep building in that area. And of course, doing this work involves collaborating with partners everywhere, particularly with citizens. And the community feed-in tariff and net metering possibilities mean that it is indeed possible to work with people to build small supplies of safe, clean, renewable energy. Bill 92, the Power Rate Reduction Review Act, again seems to suggest that Nova Scotians are without advocates when it comes to electricity rates. And as the Minister of Energy was pointing out earlier, perhaps the leader of the third party has forgotten or failed to mention in clear ways the function that the Utility and Review Board plays in this province. The URAB has a solid record of protecting ratepayers' interests. The UARB has placed limits on how much salary can be paid to NSPI employees. And the UARB has a duty to look, and I'm confident that it will continue to look, at every expense that NSPI proposes. All forms of expenses that NSPI proposes are in fact under the purview and review of the UARB, whether that's the cost of fuel to generate electricity, whether it has to do with the capital costs that the utility might be considering, whether it has to do with profit margins or return on equity, whether it has to do with salaries and benefits or bonuses, executive bonuses that might be paid to employees. These should be closely examined by UARB, and I'm sure that they will be, because that's the way things have been happening. Premier Dexter has also said, and not so long ago, that now is not the time for NSPI to look at increases in return on equity, and I'm glad to see and was pleased to see that that's indeed something that NSPI understood as well. So as we look at Bill 92, and if we're to make progress, I think real progress, meaningful progress, we need to focus and move from fossil fuels to renewables. That's what we've been doing. We've been doing that aggressively. We're harnessing wind energy. We're working with partners on building hydro. I think I failed to mention already Churchill Falls and the interesting and very important project that's happening there. We're working with partners to harness fundy tidal energy. We're helping Nova Scotia use less electricity through conservation methods, many of them in fact. And finally, Madam Speaker, I'd like to suggest that Bill 92 is cumbersome, it's out of touch, and it's tinkering with electricity costs when we need to understand the burden and the long burden that Nova Scotians are carrying. That's why we're moving toward a future that involves renewables.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's funny, it's amusing to listen to the member from Kings North suggest the opposition is out of touch on energy issues when the fact is when the NDP were in opposition, they were railing about how the URB was not working for Nova Scotians and how Nova Scotia Power was not working for Nova Scotians, and now it is actually the complete opposite that they are saying. You know, it's like night and day. It isn't even a slight shift. It's the complete opposite end of the spectrum. So. Boy, you know, you kind of wish you could have a time machine, gone ahead in time, had these quotes, and no, this is what you're going to say if you ever get in government, because boy, oh boy, oh boy. I would like to just comment on a couple of things the member from Kings North said, and just, you know, some of the things, some of the things that were prepared for him. You know, he mentioned that Premier Dexter had come out and said, and he congratulated him for saying that the return on equity should be reduced and that bonuses of executives shouldn't be charged to ratepayers. And he's right, he did. Unfortunately, they were the third party to say that, after both opposition parties had been saying that for months, and the public had been saying it for months. Finally, the Premier came out and said it, and that's great that he finally did, but let's not forget, he was the last in a very long line of people to come out and say that. The member also talked about removing the HST from home electricity. And let's talk about that for a minute, because, you know, when the leader of the third party stood up, he talked about some of the challenges businesses have. Well, that removal of the HST had zero effect on the price that small businesses and large businesses in the province pay, because they always had, they didn't have it removed, and it wouldn't have mattered because they always had as a HST as a flow-through expense, as any business owner knows. And so it did not solve the issues associated with the increase in electricity for small and medium and large businesses, family-owned businesses. They are still paying the cost they had before, yet they are dealing with customers who are paying a higher HST on all the goods and services that they want to buy from their store. So while it didn't have the kind of effect that, that the member is suggesting, and not only that, I think it was around June 3rd, 2009, in the dying days of the election, Dan O'Connor wrote a letter to the Utility and Review Board on behalf of the current Premier saying that the NDP opposed the implementation on ratepayers of an electricity tax, a demand-side management fee. He wrote that in a letter during the election. Of course, the NDP won that election that week. And then what was one of the first things they did? In the very first session, they added that tax onto electricity bills. Now, of course, we all know that was a tax originally proposed by the former member from Cape Breton North when he was Minister of Energy, and the government fell, so that got dropped. And it was at that time that Mr. O'Connor wrote that letter, and he said, you know, we oppose this during an election. And not only was it introduced, but that rate has been increased every single year since it was introduced, and there is an application now before the board to raise it again. And for many, that will wipe out much of that HST increase. So the promise wasn't, we'll remove the HST from home electricity bills, oh, and by the way, and add another tax. There was no little caveat on the end of that, but that's exactly what happened. And for businesses who didn't benefit from from that HST reduction, they are also paying that new electricity tax on the bills and that, you know, we can call it a fee, we can call it a tax, but it was the Premier and the current Premier and the current Finance Minister that said a fee is a tax. So I'm going to use their words and call it a tax, because that's what they said that's what they said it was. And so I think it's important to understand that, you know, yes, there have been some movements, and yes, there are certain things that I absolutely agree with the government on. I agree that renewable energy prices will be a more stable energy price over the long term. I absolutely agree with that. But I also think they need to recognize that even by Amir's own numbers, we're going to be into 35% electricity. And no different than the third party has to recognize that it's their federal counterparts that have indicated that coal plants have to be phased out across the country. So, you know, there's a lot of bits of this energy puzzle that are sort of being left aside in the discussion. Unless you have the whole discussion, it makes it difficult. Which brings us, you know, to this bill, which talks about creating this independent panel of consumers to look at the policies that contribute to the cost of energy. Listen, the last bill was fine. I agree that government should always be saying what the cost of legislation or regulation is when they introduce it. I absolutely agree with that. But to set up a panel of consumers and have these public meetings, that sounds great, but if it was so important, why then did a few weeks ago the third party participate in secret meetings with Nova Scotia Power to raise power rates? You know, we chose not to. We didn't participate in that. We said, listen, if you're going to hold those meetings in secret, we're not going. But the third party chose to participate in them, and then the leader of the third party put out a press release when it probably wasn't a press release, I guess it was just a statement to the media after saying that he was happy with the solution. He's happy with the 5% increase. Well, I'm glad he was. I'm not. And there were lots of others who were in that meeting who weren't happy with it and opposed it before the board following. You know, because we recognized as a caucus that coming on the heels of this was going to be already another increase in the Efficiency Nova Scotia tax on January 1st. Also is going to be coming a fuel adjustment mechanism increase on January 1st, plus the 2 deferred increases coming to January 1st, that we're into one heck of a whopper of an increase already on January 1st of 2012. And I think one of the challenges is Nova Scotia Power has been so good at taking those numbers and spreading them out, saying, oh, it's 3%, it's 5%, it's 2%. And they keep getting reported individually in the media. But if you actually add them all up and compound all those increases for what's coming January 1st, because nobody's talking about the 2 increases that were approved as deferred fuel increases from last year, which was already, I think it was about 3.5%, plus the 3.2%, plus this 5%, you're already over 10% before you even add the increased efficiency in Nova Scotia, all coming this January 1st. It's not a 5% increase January 1st. It's not a 3.2% increase. It's all of this on top of one another. And you can imagine, you know, all 52 of us are going to have the calls from people, that next group of people that falls off the area where they can afford power bills. And that's really important. We're all going to be faced with the issue that there are people who are just struggling to cover the cost of food and everything else now who will not be able to afford it come January 1st. It'll be that next group of people. And those are the people we need to worry about, because how are we going to help them? The member for Bedford Birch Cove has asked the Minister of Community Services whether her department had any plans to provide additional assistance with that. No plans. Well, I don't... So what is the plan? You know, hey, are we going to say to people, I'm sorry, you know, you're going to have to pick food or heat, because I'm sorry, but your food cost is going to go up too, because the cost of food and the cost of services, all of that goes up when power goes up. Your property tax bills go up when power rates go up. And we all know that. Every municipality in this province lists power rates as one of their risk factors when they set their property tax. And they always sit there and say, note that that's one of the things, because they have to pay for things like street lights in their buildings, and all the efficiency upgrades in the world isn't going to solve that. And so you look at things like, we had advocated that Efficiency Nova Scotia be funded through shareholders. The Premier wants to say all the time that, oh, we're against efficiency. You know, he knows that's false. We said from day one that we agreed with efficiency. We said it should be paid for by shareholders, not ratepayers. But it was the Premier that, and the Premier said that. Premier's Chief of Staff said that during the election, same thing. But afterwards he decided it was low-income families and businesses and everybody else that should pay for it instead of shareholders. Well, you know, that's a choice, and the Premier can't back away from the choices that he's made. At the end of the day, power rates are a major issue, and we all got to get behind it, and we all got to come up with solutions to solve that. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I sit here with great interest of the debate that's going on today about power rates, and I'm listening to the member from Dartmouth East saying that the leader of our party said that he was happy with 5%, and I'm sure he'd be happy to table the documentation to prove that that is indeed exactly what he said. But that's only part of what we're here about. We're talking tonight about power rates and the impact that it has on the people of Nova Scotia. And Madam Speaker, there is not one person in this House that would dispute the fact that power rates are having an impact on our province and on our economy and on our homes and our households. All of the members here understand that this is a major issue, and we all want to find a solution. But we seem to be taking different roads, which is not uncommon when you have three parties in the House trying to find solutions. The thing that I want to make clear, perfectly clear, is that we in the Progressive Conservative Party, we support green energy. Green energy is very important to us. It is where we have to go, and it's where we want to go. But that road is a long road, Madam Speaker, and we have to take that road 1 inch at a time to be sure we get there in a way that it has an impact on our carbon footprint here in the province of Nova Scotia, but at the same time isn't too big that it will hurt the small businesses of this province or the homeowners of this province. The increase in power rates are killing jobs. Again, that's not a surprise to anybody in this House. It's certainly not a surprise to the people that are working at NewPage or the people that are at Bowater Mercy. But what is interesting, Madam Speaker, is all the people who in a small industry are saying that indeed they are being affected. 20% of the people that are involved in the Federation of Independent Businesses are saying that they're probably going to have to lay off 1 to 2 people just to make ends meet so they can battle the cost of power in their operation. So we have to keep that in mind. We need to do something that's important. Now, I listened to the Minister of Energy and the member from Kings North talking about this expensive coal. And they're saying that that's the reason we have such a problem with our power rates. As a matter of fact, the minister on August the 13th, he put out a press release and it said, imported coal is costing our consumers dearly. And I'd like to table that, Madam Speaker. And there is a cost for coal, no question, and my colleague from Inverness went through the costs. But his own department, his very own department, the Minister of Energy's department, told the Resources Committee that regardless of what took place, in the best case scenario, 10 years from now, 35% of the needs of electricity in this province are still going to be met by coal. And that's in the best case scenario. Nova Scotia Power, when they're putting out their platform, they'll tell you that they're going to need coal for the next 20 years. And we need to have power. We need to reduce it. Now, the thing that we have to remember, Madam Chair, is that there's technology and new ideas coming on how to burn coal cleanly all the time. There's people all over the world using it. As a matter of fact, in the U.S., they're converting back to doing more coal-fired, and they're looking at different ways of cleaning up the coal-fired generation. Now, I've said in this House, and I've said many times, and I've had the Premier even sneer at me when I said we should be burning Cape Breton coal. He says, we don't have any mines. That's what he said when he was sitting across there. Well, you know what? We have the potential of one of the biggest mines in North America in Cape Breton. A mine that could supply coal to Nova Scotia Power, and it would also make coal for metallurgical coal for the markets in India and China. Now, here's the question that I have problems, and I can't understand when the Minister of Energy keeps talking about this expensive coal. If we're going to have to burn coal anyway, Madam Speaker, if we're going to have to burn it, why is it we're not trying to get jobs for Nova Scotians mining that coal rather than giving those jobs to people overseas in other countries? If we're going to have to use the product, and we have the product, then I don't think it's a far-fetched idea to say we should be using Nova Scotians to mine it. We should be having those Nova Scotians paying taxes. We should have a company. According to the minister's statement in the press release, he said it was an expensive imported coal. Well, this company would be a company that's dealing in Canadian dollars, selling to a company that's buying in Canadian dollars, so that would help negate some of that factor. The other thing that's going on is when we're bringing ships loads of coal in from overseas, Madam Speaker, they're not full ships because at present they can't get into the harbour in Sydney with a full load. So they're taking smaller loads. So you're going to increase the amount of coal that you're going to be able to get because you get it here. Now, in the rate hearings, we heard that Nova Scotia Power went $40 million over and above in their energy fuel costs. And part of that was because they had coal on the ground that was too wet. Well, Madam Speaker, if you had that coal being supplied right here in Nova Scotia by Nova Scotians for Nova Scotians, then you wouldn't have the issue of it getting wet by being stockpiled on the ground. That would not take place. What we would see was Nova Scotian coal being used by Nova Scotian consumers who are paying Nova Scotian taxes. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like an outrageous idea. And again, going back to the Minister of Energy's statement, 35% under a best-case scenario of our energy needs are going to have to be by coal for the next 10 years, and Nova Scotia Power says even longer. So why is it that we don't want to burn Cape Breton coal? It makes no sense to me. There is some Nova Scotia coal being used now. Why couldn't we all be Nova Scotia coal? And I know that we have to move off of coal, but it's the Department of Energy that's saying that it's not going to happen right away. Now, we've seen job loss after job loss after job loss, and here we have an opportunity to actually create jobs, help our economy, and put people back to work. the net loss of jobs that we've seen on Cape Breton has seen our unemployment raise significantly. We have an opportunity now to change that. So I don't know why the minister keeps pointing at this coal and keeps saying that it's the reason that the power rates are going up, because regardless of what happens, we're still going to have to use that coal. So I must be missing something here, because I want to put Cape Bretoners back to work. I want those Cape Bretoners to then pay taxes to the province of Nova Scotia, to the municipality of the CBRM, so that indeed we have an opportunity to see some economic growth and impact. And by the way, the coal that would come out of the Cape Breton mine is a better quality coal than any coal that they're bringing from overseas. It's about 15 to 2,500 BTUs better than anything they're bringing from overseas, which would mean that they wouldn't have to burn as much to create the same amount of energy as they are now. So to me, it makes a lot of sense, but then I guess it's not about sense, it's just about the fact that somebody on that side of the house over there wants to pound their chest and say, we're going to be the green giants of the world. Well, you know what? They may be the green giants, but the morning they wake up and they can't turn on their lights or take a shower, that's the day they're going to know that Cape Breton coal is part of the solution, not part of the problem. And eventually, if all goes well, you know, the Minister of Culture and whatever it is, heritage over there, he's over there saying...
Order, please. The honourable member from Cape Breton West has the floor.
But I would ask that member to get up and explain why it's like this. Because he and his government, Madam Speaker, he and his government have already said, his department, his colleague in cabinet have said, we have to burn coal. So now he's over there saying, so he's saying it's better to give the jobs to people overseas than give it to Nova Scotians. And that, Madam Speaker, does not sit well with me or anybody on this side of the House. If we're going to put people to work, it should be Nova Scotians and not people that are over the other side of somewhere else. Nova Scotians deserve to get work. That government deserves and needs to give them that work, and they're not doing it. They're putting people out of work. They're not putting people at jobs. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I now recognize the House Leader for the Progressive Conservative Party.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Things are just starting to warm up, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to say that. That concludes opposition business for today, and I pass it over to the Government House Leader for our work tomorrow.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, after the orders today, tomorrow, Madam Speaker, we will be calling bills for second reading, bills 86, 90, 93, 94, 95, 96, and 98. I wish you to now rise to meet from the hours of 2 to 6 p.m. tomorrow.
Thank you. The question is that we now rise to meet tomorrow, November 17th, between the hours of 2 and 6 p.m. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I need a moment.
We have now reached the moment of interruption. The late debate tonight is therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize and honour the tremendous sacrifice made by members of our Canadian Armed Forces currently serving, our veterans, their families, and supporting communities who serve and protect this great country, not just on Remembrance Day. And I would recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise this evening to speak about the tremendous sacrifice and equally important, I think, in today's world, the contributions that our military families, whether they are currently serving or have had a family member who has served in the past or maybe contemplating serving in the future, have on our communities. On the heels of a week of remembrance that we all took part in celebrating and honoring, recognizing, it always raises a question in my mind of how can I, as a person who's so proud of the military traditions and presence and friendships that I have in my community, how can I encourage people to think about these sacrifices and these contributions every day beyond the day of November 11th? Mr. Speaker, it's on the heels as well of a tremendous milestone in Nova Scotia history around the awarding of the military contracts to Irving shipyards. It also gives me, it lends to my thoughts around what does this mean to Nova Scotia about these contracts, because we hear about the doom and gloom on the other side of this House about how, it may not pan out. I've actually had we've heard from a member on the other side talk about how Nova Scotians aren't going to benefit. And I think, you know what? We already have benefited. When we think about the pride that was evoked, the united element, how everyone in Nova Scotia united together to celebrate and cheer on, if nothing else, cheer on the Irving shipyard for that contract. Because when I think about those shipbuilders who have made their mark, proven their ability, and have achieved this award, they are friends and families and loved ones of their military as well. And so I know that they are taking more pride, and they look forward to the pride that they will feel when they're building these ships, to know that someday they're actually going to be in our yards, in our harbor, sorry. And I think that has united us again in a ray of hope that we haven't had before. So again, these are the kinds of things that I've been thinking about over the last little while as these good things have been coming forward. There's no better time, in my opinion, to continue to pay tribute to our military servicemen and women, our veterans, the families that support them, and the communities that support them. I don't think it's a stretch to say, Mr. Speaker, that just about everyone in Nova Scotia, young and old, and anywhere in between, knows someone in the military. There are sons and our daughters, there are nieces and our nephews,